McCuistion, talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McCuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study and Teaching of the Science of Self-Government, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future, Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.
Well, did you ever wonder why so many Americans move from one state to another? Did you ever wonder why some states have taxes and regulations that are higher than others? Well, did you ever wonder how natural resources figured into the equation? Well, finally, did you ever wonder if there may be a connection? Well, here's the good news. Your wondering is over, because here on part one of The Wealth of States, we'll look at the economic data of several states and explain why some states are more prosperous than others. And to help us in this quest, I want to start with one of our longtime panelists here in this program for over 25 years. Bud Weinstein he's an author, he's an educator, he's an economist, and he teaches part-time at SMU, and he serves as Associate Director of SMU's McGuire Energy Institute. Bud, welcome back to the program.
Oh, happy to be here as always.
Thank you. And sitting next to you is someone you know and someone that viewer knows well from Fox News and CNN. Are you a regular on Fox News every day, or does it just seem that way, Steve?
Almost every day.
Almost every day. All right, okay. Today you're here in Dallas. Steve is the chief economist of the Heritage Foundation now. He served as a senior economics writer for the Wall Street Journal for 9 years. And even though you see him regularly on those programs, what you may not know is he's the co-author of this new book. And I'm going to give the short definition of this book, short name, which is The Wealth of States. But right. The real name is this, Steve: An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of States. Now, where did that name come from, for heaven's sake?
Well, I can hit that one out of the park.
Okay,
the title of Adam Smith's famous book is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. And by the way, Dennis, do you know what year that book was written in?
1776.
1776.
Yes.
Two of the greatest documents in the English language.
That's right.
Were written in 1776. So Adam Smith talked about why nations grow and decline, and we talk in this book about among the 50 states, why some of them are booming, like Texas and Tennessee and North Dakota, and why other states like California, New York, and Connecticut are falling behind.
Right, and it's an interesting book. I actually did read the book, and I got underlines all the way through it. The good news is for you, viewer, I'm not going to read the whole book to you here. We are, however, going to start with a roll-in from one of your co-authors, a guy named Art Laffer. So when we're ready, let's look at Art Laffer and his speech to the Heritage Foundation recently.
I'm going to start out with a Richard Vedder one, too, if I may. The phrase I love from you, Richard, is most of all is taxes redistribute people, not wealth, which is really true. It's just, it's really true. But what I'd like to do is just go a little serious with you here. I mean, we wrote this and we looked back at the literature. We found Colin and Rosemary Campbell, whom literature I'd known back in the 70s, really did a beautiful job on comparing New Hampshire and Vermont, which covered much of what we're talking about in the book here. I want to get to one with you that's just very straightforward. There have been 11 states in the last 53 years that have introduced a progressive or an income tax. First thing we tried to do was take what happened to these 11 states. If you ask anyone anytime in any of the capitals of any of the states, just randomly, Steve, and we've all been around all the capitals, some of them may know the last 3 or 4 years' history of their state. Almost none of them have any comprehension of the rest of the states. You know, we have 50 states that have been doing things for at least 50 plus years. And if anything could be done, there has been one state somewhere at some time who did it. And there's a lot of evidence, just a repository of evidence coming up. So what we did was we looked at the 11 states, and these aren't weirdo states, people. They just aren't. First one was West Virginia, 1961. The last one was Connecticut. Lowell Weicker put it in 1991. He's a Yalie. Cool.
Figures.
The other ones were Maine, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Nebraska, Illinois. I mean, these are all sort of major normal states that have all introduced the income tax. So what we did was we went back to 3 years prior to the introduction of the income tax. And we looked at each of these states. Now, they all did it at different times, so we have different demarcation points. But for these 11 states, we looked at what their sort of metrics were prior to introducing the income tax. We looked at population, employment, labor force, output, and yes, tax revenues. Okay, we looked at all those metrics and looked at all of those 11 states, and then we compared what they were in the 3 years prior to introducing the income tax and what they are in the last year or two at present. Let me just say, every single one of those 11 states, not one exception, declined as a share of the U.S. in each and every one of those metrics. Every one. Some of them declined by a lot. I mean, Michigan went from what, 5.1% of the U.S. economy prior to the income tax? And by the way, we all know who brought in the income tax in Michigan, don't we? Romney. Just thought I'd mention that. Just sort of fun, little fun. Went from 5.1% of the U.S. to 2.7% of the U.S.
Wow. Jeez.
That's a crash. In 1950, Detroit had a population of 1.68 million. Today, Detroit would be lucky to have 680,000 people in it. My home state of Ohio, Richard's home state. I mean, you know, Ohio was the booming, mega economy of the world. You go back to Cleveland, you look at, I was born in Youngstown, my parents were born, raised in northeastern Ohio. All four of my grandparents were, 7 out of 8 of my great-grandparents were. I go to visit all of my family up at Lakeview Cemetery and then travel around. Have you seen what Cleveland looks like? It's like a bomb hit it. I mean, it's a catastrophe. Not only Cleveland and Ohio. I mean, let me just give you one example that's sort of fun. New Jersey. Now, all of you know New Jersey, don't you? New Jersey in 1965. Now, think of this. It had neither an income tax nor a sales tax. It didn't have either one of those. Not one. No income tax, no sales. 1965, what's that? It's less than 50 years ago. It was one of the fastest growing states in the nation, attracting people from everywhere, and they had a budget surplus. 5 years ago, when my student was governor of New Jersey, he was mine at the University of Chicago. You remember him? John Corzine.
Oh,
He was. He was one of your classmates, Guy. I mean, but in full disclosure, with you, I should say, in all honesty, that he was a C student. And with some of the recent disclosures of MF Global, I'm not even sure he earned the C. Just teasing. Under Corzine, New Jersey had one of the highest property tax rates, one of the highest sales tax rates, one of the highest income tax rates, one of the slowest growing states, people leaving in droves, and they had a huge budget deficit. How do they do that? You can't balance a budget on the backs of people who've emigrated. You can't balance a budget on the backs of people who are unemployed. You can't. If you look at these states, every single one of them declined as a share of the U.S. economy. It is in tax revenues as well. They didn't even get the money. Now, if we were sitting there in the capitals of these states when they were debating the efficacy of putting in an income tax, what type of arguments would you have heard? Now, I assume these people weren't idiots, so they could probably understand that if you have two locations, A and B, if you raise taxes in B and lower them in A, producers, manufacturers, and people are going to move from to. You would. I'm not going way over your heads on this, please. I assume they understood there would be deleterious effects of raising the income tax, but they thought it was worth it. And why would it be worth it? What are the arguments they put forth? We need more schools. We need more highways. You know, we need better police protection. We need more fire protection. I mean, we've got all these things that we need badly. And as these people say, you know, I'd rather experience a little slower growth, frankly, so we could get better public services for the people of my state.
So how'd that work out, Steve? Did they get better services after raising taxes?
Yeah, well, that was one of the most interesting findings, I think, of the book, Dennis, is that you got a state like California that spends about 30 to 40% more on public services than here in Texas. And what we found was almost across the board Texas actually has better services, better schools, better hospitals, better roads, better corrections, and so on than California does, even though these states like California spend so much more. And that's an important point, because what we're saying in the book is, look, if you cut your taxes, you can make your economy grow faster. And some of our liberal critics say, oh, but you're not going to have good services. You know, if you cut your taxes, you're not going to be able to have good schools. You're not going to have good roads. And we say, wait a minute. You know, just spending more on services doesn't mean that you're going to get better care. I mean, I'll give you just one example, Dennis. I live in Washington, D.C. I grew up in Chicago. Those two cities spend more on the schools than just about any other city in the country, and they have the worst public schools.
Well, is it because they spend all that money, or are there other reasons?
Well, there are a lot of reasons, but all I'm saying is that spending more money is no guarantee that you're going to get better. In fact, this is one of the kind of my bones of contention. In the private sector where you've worked, you try to cut your costs and become as efficient as possible, and we measure progress by cutting costs. In the public sector, it's the opposite. If something isn't getting better, if an agency isn't performing the services we want, we give it more money. I mean, what kind of incentive system
That
is
doesn't sound too good.
Yeah.
Okay, Bud, react to what you've heard here.
Well, I'm in general agreement, but I do think any state has to face up to the challenge of needs for the provision of public services. And I sometimes think that maybe here in Texas, as wealthy as we are, we could spend a little bit more on public education, highways, what have you. Now, I agree spending more money doesn't necessarily get you better outcomes, but we have dropped in the last 25 years from about 35th in the country to 49th in the country in per
You
pupil
mean in spending? Or?
and per pupil
right,
spending
right.
for public education.
Right.
And we have a rapidly growing population. We have much higher birth rates. We have a lot of immigrants in the state. So all those per capitas help to pull the numbers down. But I have argued for some time that being 49th in public education maybe isn't a plus for the state.
In terms of expenditures now. Not
Well, I mean, in terms
results.
of being able to attract people and attract industry. Now, I know we've been very successful in attracting people and industry, but nonetheless, I might feel better in terms of education if maybe we were 40th in the country and not 49th.
All right. Let's talk about something that is one of your areas of expertise for sure, Bud, and that's energy. One of the things that you wrote a nice article, op-ed piece for the Dallas Morning News recently, which was interesting, and you just came back from New York, I think a new grandson, is that right?
That's right.
What a deal. You were in New York and you were reading some things, and then we were talking about the sort of the comparison between New York and Pennsylvania, especially as it relates to energy. Bring us up to date on your thoughts there.
Well, I had a laugh when I was watching all these promos for Andrew Cuomo's reelection campaign, claiming that he had created 500,000 new jobs during his first term. And I don't know whether that's a real number or not, but clearly in New York State, you've got two economies. You've got the New York metropolitan area, which is driven by financial services, tourism, high tech, transportation, and then you've got the rest of the state. And the rest of the state's an economic disaster area. The one potential for reviving upstate New York is energy development, the most promising opportunity, particularly along that southern tier of New York, which sits atop one of the sweet spots of the Marcellus Shale.
right.
And yet there is a ban on hydraulic fracturing in New York State. Those folks can look across the river and see the rigs operating in Pennsylvania. Energy development in Pennsylvania has helped to revive the most depressed part of that state. You see faster job growth in Pennsylvania, a lower unemployment rate. You see a revival of the manufacturing sector in Pennsylvania to help supply products to the energy sector. So you talk about night and day, and it's simply a result of public policy. Now, the public policy in New York right now is anti-energy development, whereas in Pennsylvania, for the most part, it's been pro. That isn't to say there hasn't been some pushback in Pennsylvania. But,
This is an important point because, by the way, my favorite part of the end of that story is because they're not allowing drilling in New York, what they're doing is drilling down in Pennsylvania, going horizontally under New York and taking out all their oil and gas. But you know, when people talk about the Texas boom, so of course Texas is booming. You've got all this oil and gas, and there's no question Texas is the #1 energy state in the country. But you know what? The second state that has the most energy other than Texas? California. California has magnificent energy resource. They sit atop of something called the Monterey Shale that has $2 trillion worth of oil and gas, but they don't want to go after it. In Texas, it takes, I asked people in Midland today where I was, how long does it take you to get a permit to do drilling? 5 or 6 days. In California, it could take you 5 or 6 months. So there's just an attitudinal difference in terms of these natural resources.
Yeah, there's no question that California, again, has tremendous potential. And it's still today, I think, the number 4, number 5 oil-producing state. But there's so much more, both onshore and offshore. But the mentality in California is very much anti-drilling, anti-fossil fuels. You've got a very strong environmental lobby. So it's true the Monterey Shale has got lots and lots of oil and gas. I will be very surprised if much, if any of that is developed.
Well, that's a shame for California.
And that's why they have an
us.
unemployment, one of the reasons their unemployment rate is 3 percentage points higher than it is here in Texas.
When you talk about this energy revolution, I mean, it is the biggest economic story out there. If the last 5 years, this energy boom eclipses everything. In fact, without the energy boom, there would have been no recovery at all in this country.
Right.
You know, we would have been flatlined. Now, what's interesting, even the New York Times recently has acknowledged that because of these low costs now of natural gas, because of fracking and horizontal drilling, we have a manufacturing renaissance going on in this country. They're rebuilding steel plants in Youngstown, Ohio, which used to be the most depressed city in America. Pennsylvania, Michigan, I was there, Dennis, a few months ago, a place like Grand Rapids. It's starting to boom again. And when you ask these manufacturers, why is it that you're growing so rapidly? They say there are a lot of reasons, but one of them is the United States now has the lowest energy costs of any of the countries that we compete with.
Yeah. Now, Bud, you have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly all this time. Give that viewer some concept of where we were, and where we were, and then where we are now from your perspective.
Well, the good news about the energy boom is that we're now importing about 30% of our oil. 5 years ago, we were importing 60%.
That's amazing.
We're today the #1 natural gas producing country in the world, and in a year or two, we're going to be #1 in oil. That has created hundreds of thousands of jobs, and it's benefited not only the energy producing states, as Steve said, it's benefiting the whole economy. Lower electric bills, lower heating costs, lower costs for industrial operations, helping to revive our manufacturing. One can go on and on, helping our exports, attracting foreign investment. It's just been a tremendous boon, and Steve's absolutely right. If it hadn't been for the energy boom, we'd probably still be in recession.
By the way, I'll just add one thing. It's also benefited our environment. Do you know which country over the last 4 years has reduced its carbon emissions the most?
I'm going to guess the United States.
We have. And the reason is, as natural gas becomes plentiful and affordable and cheap, we're transferring out of coal into natural gas, so our carbon emissions are falling a lot.
Okay,
and yet the environmentalists don't like it. They're against it. They're trying to hold it up.
Well, but see, the environmentalists are all singing from the same hymnal.
Of course.
The production and consumption of any fossil fuel, regardless of its GHG footprint, is bad for the
exactly
planet.
Right.
End of story. But, I mean, there is, I wouldn't call it a downside, but there are costs associated with rapid energy development.
There
and
is.
You were just in Midland.
Right.
I was
The
down in
water
the Eagle
issue.
Ford a couple of weeks ago. I was up in the Bakken of North Dakota last year, and you've got a lot of traffic. The roads are all torn up. It doesn't smell so good.
Yeah.
There's a housing shortage.
Sure.
You've got crime. You've got drug use. There are all these factors associated with rapid energy development communities. But you know what? I showed my class a film today about the oil boom in the 1920s and how it affected Texas. And it's the same story all over again.
Yeah, right. Well, when you guys looked at all these states, Steve, one of the things that you, I don't know if you tried to carve out the impact of natural resources on it. How did you look at that from an analytical standpoint?
Look, I mean, one of the points we make, because Arthur Laffer and I, we go to state capitals all over the country, and we advise these politicians how you can make your state grow faster. Now, some states have bountiful resources like Texas and California, and others don't. There's nothing politicians can do about that, right? I mean, they can't change the weather, they can't change the resources. What they can change, and this is our message, They have control over the policies. And we find that these policies matter a lot. We look at about 16 different policies, everything from education policy to right to work laws versus forced unionism to the tax rates to regulations. And we find that the sort of laissez-faire states, the states that have low tax rates, are right to work and so on, have significantly more job creation, even when you account for these other factors like the weather and natural resources. So this stuff matters. Now, there are a lot of liberal economists who say, no, this doesn't matter at all. We think we've got pretty good evidence that it is. Just, one statistic, I mean, we compare the 4 biggest states: California, New York, Texas, and Florida. California and New York have tax rates of 13%, the highest in the world, in the country. As you know, Texas and Florida are 0. There's been 3 times as much job creation over the last 15 years in Texas and Florida as there has been in California and New York.
Let me ask you a question, Steve, because this really concerns me. I agree with you that the states that have, how should I say, a modest taste for taxation, regulation, government spending tend to do better than those that have high levels of taxation and spending. But what worries me is this growing competition among the states to try to land industry by giving away tax breaks.
Oh, you're so right.
And,
we just saw that.
and we've just seen that in the Tesla.
Yes.
In the Tesla deal. So there's a lot of hand wringing going on in Austin. Oh my goodness, we lost Tesla.
Yeah.
And my reaction to that was, we didn't lose anything. We saved $1 billion.
Well, I'm with you on that. I mean, we don't think that what we call smokestack chasing, which is what a lot of states are doing, is a proper economic development strategy. Because if you're going to give all these tax breaks to Tesla, then guess what? All the other businesses are going to have to pay more. What we favor is a positive kind of climate, economic and tax and regulatory climate that can benefit every business. Because look, as you know, you've written on this, 2/3 of jobs come from small businesses, not for big businesses. They don't have lobbyists, Dennis. Right. They can't go to Austin or they can't go to Sacramento and say, give me this big tax break.
Well, the problem, we just had one big acquisition here called Toyota, Bud. What about that one?
Well, I think Toyota's great.
Because they got here.
No, listen, having their national or their North American headquarters here, I think says a lot about Texas.
Yep.
But on the other hand, they didn't move here because they got $40 million from the enterprise fund, or the Governor Perry's walking around money. They came here because of our location in the center part of the country. They've got a couple of manufacturing plants nearby. They can be at either coast in 3 hours. They like the tax and regulatory climate here. Texas has a lot of things to sell. That's why I get so annoyed when I see our state throwing money like $40 million here. Gosh, what do we give to, speaking of Tesla, we already gave Elon Musk millions of dollars to put his SpaceX facility in Brownsville. So,
By the way, Tesla is a big risk. Tesla may go bankrupt. Who knows?
I think the state of Nevada has mortged its future.
They have.
And maybe it'll play out and maybe it won't.
But we've talked a lot about Texas because we're here in Texas. But I'll give you another example in the Northeast, on the other side of the country. New Hampshire is a state with no sales tax or income tax. It's the live free or die state, as you know, Dennis. And it's the one state that has really flourished in the Northeast. In fact, people are moving from Massachusetts and Vermont into New Hampshire. So many examples. In the South, one of the fastest growing states is Tennessee. Tennessee has no wage and salary tax. A lot of these things really do matter. I was in Reno, Nevada, not long ago. Reno is where the Tesla plant will be. But you would be amazed at how many businessmen and women I talked to who said, I used to live in California. I love California. I love the weather. We just couldn't take it anymore. And it wasn't just taxes, Dennis. They just said that the regulatory environment there, on the environment, on OSHA, all these things, that the regulators treated these businesses like they were enemy combatants. And people just said they couldn't take it anymore. And they moved 150 miles over the border into Nevada. That kind of thing is happening all the time. And one of the messages of our book is these states like California and New York and Connecticut, my home state of Illinois, they better change or they're going to get bled to death.
Yeah, and getting back to energy for a minute, there are 32 states of the 50 who produce commercial quantities of oil and gas. It's just not a handful. Offshore is pretty much off limits to drilling. There's tremendous potential offshore, the Atlantic, Pacific, 1/3 of the Gulf of Mexico remains off limits. Now that's a federal decision. Only the feds can change that. And it's not just fossil fuels. We've got non-fuel minerals in great abundance. But many states don't want to develop them for the same reasons that they object to any type of mining.
Well, you mentioned rare earths. That person watching may not have heard of the problem with rare earths, but just in the couple of minutes we have left, give us a small snippet of rare earths.
Well, rare earths are these elements that have unusual properties, so they tell me, having to do with whether it's conduction or insulation or whatever. But for instance, they're used in these battery packs that Tesla supposedly is going to build in their gigafactory. Well, we have the potential to produce most rare earths in the U.S., but we don't. We import most of our rare earths.
From where, China and countries like
Well,
that?
yeah, China, South Africa, Canada, other places. But
Friendly places.
well, I mean, friendly, unfriendly, that's beside the point. We are the richest country in the world when it comes to mineral resources, and it's not just oil, gas, and coal. We've got just about everything. But to open a mine in this country is near impossible. It can take you 10 years, 15 years to get a permit. It's just a lot easier to import. So our import dependence, while it's falling for oil, it's rising for non-fuel minerals.
And meanwhile, I live in Virginia. We're a coal-producing state. And what's happened to the coal industry in this country is tragic. I mean, there are towns not far from where I live that have been third, fourth generation coal mining towns, where that's what the towns live off of the coal. And President Obama, because of his regulations on carbon, has essentially vaporized these whole communities. This is a president who says how much he cares about the middle class. I mean, there's people who make $30,000, $40,000 a year whose jobs have been eliminated. So we could be, look, we have 500 years worth of coal in this country. So I don't think any country in the world has more coal than we do. I don't understand a lot of these regulations that are inhibiting employment growth.
But you would agree that we have to worry about the environment. I mean, Bud, you're big on the environment. There are real concerns there, just like there is in fracking, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so we don't want to do it at the expense of that.
Well, what annoys me most on the coal front is that you've got the environmental community opposed to U.S. coal exports. And the fact is, the rest of the world, particularly the developing world, is going to continue to rely on coal for the foreseeable
China's
future.
building coal plants every couple of
and
weeks.
to say, oh, we shouldn't sell our coal to them because we're just exporting our pollution, that's silly. And that destroys even more jobs.
Well, let me tell you, if you guys just had an opinion, it'd be great. Thank you both for being here. And I don't know about you, I didn't get a word in edgewise, but that's okay. That's all right. So here is my hope, however, that you now understand just how policies affect economic circumstances. Now, my second hope is that you'll join us next week for part 2 of this 2-part series. More information is at McCuistionTV.com. And thanks again for inviting us in to talk about things that matter with people who care.
A DVD of this program is available for $20 plus $5 postage and handling, and in Texas, applicable tax. For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email nickyn@nickymcquistion.com. Visit our website at www.mcquistiontv.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McQuistionTV or download McQuistion TV video podcasts on iTunes. Production of McCuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study and Teaching of the Science of Self-Government, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future, Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.